We're out visiting farmers, taking consultation responses on a really important challenge for farmers. The government are now proposing to add more cost to livestock farmers here in the UK. My role as president of the NFU is to make sure that we look at what this means for farmers, see how it affects your individual businesses, and to the best of our ability, challenge the bad bits, promote the good bits, and make sure we here in England aren't disadvantaged anymore in a very competitive marketplace. I'm very, very conscious how difficult this subject is to talk about a government that is so blatantly failing this region on TB, for them to now come and say we want money off you to try and run an animal health and welfare policy. We're very aware that this is an incredibly challenging area that we need to address.
Well, the key elements of this consultation are, firstly, that Defra is proposing the formation of a new independent body that would take over the handling of animal health issues in England. Secondly, that Defra is proposing to introduce a levy so that farmers are paying towards the costs of their budgeted costs in Defra for exotic disease preparedness and surveillance. And thirdly, that Defra is proposing the introduction of a compulsory insurance scheme which would in effect cover the government's unbudgeted cost for an animal disease outbreak. So that's the costs that they're not budgeting for that accrue if you have a disease outbreak. And here we have some of the questions we've had so far about this consultation.
It's extremely important that it's what would happen if it goes through, because disease affects us all, and if the government is not or at least their department is not on top of the situation, they could bill us with an open bill. Now that's quite scary, especially if they're not actually curing the problem.
On the way Defra is doing the consultation, it is pleasing that Defra has come to us to look at consultation, but some of the figures within the consultation are very woolly and need to be addressed.
The opportunity to move the agenda forward as true businessmen, to understand that the world is crying out for food production and we need healthy livestock to be part of that equation. This is a golden opportunity for our powers that be to work with us rather than against us, and this is a real turning point if we can make it work as a true partnership.
And they actually said, and this is the government, what they call the Competent Controller General, and that's the Auditor General for government expenditure, not Defra, says in a publication that Defra does not have the wherewithal to develop an effective, efficient, transparent cost-sharing scheme.
I could wax lyrically about how the industry has rescued itself from the big BSE, foot and mouth epidemics of the past 10 years. I could also wax lyrically how every committee in the NFU have firmly turned this proposal down, with the view that unless Defra gets serious on TB in this area, we've nothing to talk about. But what really frightens me about this, Mr. President, is we are starting something here that we do not know where it's going to end. It could be £4 a cow, we could have a nasty run of diseases, it could be £40 a cow.
I agree with you that there are enormous risks in this, but the trouble I think when you look at this, the risks are there whichever way you go. Do you know what I mean? The risks are there of just walking away and letting government do it on itself, and having seen the way they've drafted this, it scares me to death. But there are risks, and I'm not going to try and sell you something that I don't think there are risks on. There are risks in going the independent body route. There are risks, because it still would be a government department. But equally, we know that it's got to be a government department of some sort, because we wanted to spend 400 million plus of government money, which is public money. So there isn't a straight answer to your question, other than I completely acknowledge it. And I think whichever way you go, you are facing risks of not being able to control this. As I say, for me, I think the only thing, the way you've got to do this is change the culture and not get this idea that you can just collect this money from farmers.
So why doesn't the polluter pay? If I pollute a river, I pay or my insurance company pays and fined. So it's about time we turned this around, went back to government and said polluter pays.
What Richard said is absolutely right, and when we did the consultation 18 months ago, that was the response. And if anybody looks at the consultation on the Defra website, in the annexes, it has a list of the points that were put to the government from the industry when it did its circle of roadshows, and the very points you put, Richard, were in there. The trouble is the government has said we can't do that. So that was our first line. That is exactly what we've been saying, and we'll probably say it again in the response.
We talk about producing food, and the population is going to rise from 6 billion to 9 billion in 30 years. And we're entering what is needed to be the third revolution of farming, a new era. And surely we must be lobbying for actually environment to be taken out of Defra. Go back to the model where we were MAF, and then we'd have a much better say. And I would strategically suggest that if you started raising some of these issues to the next new government that will be coming in, who we hope will be much more responsive, then you might find that the agenda is raised further up and we wouldn't have to be dealing with this.
I bore for England on the need to produce food, and if you saw Nick Herbert's latest press release, he ticked off nearly every single one of the boxes we asked him to tick off on the need for farmers to produce more, and research and development, on the way you actually encourage production, etc. That was absolutely all there in Nick Herbert's most recent press release. I also mentioned earlier on about trying to put agriculture back into Defra. I think that the notion of going back to a MAF, of course, I would love to see a specific minister at government level for agriculture. I see no appetite at this moment in time, but actually the role of agriculture, getting agriculture mentioned again, for God's sake. When they reformed in 2001 at the NFU, and I wasn't involved at the time, you know, they had to fight to get food put in there. You know, that was how bad it was.
Cost sharing has and is being brought in Europe. I was just wondering how that has and is working there, especially in respect with blue tongue. And you mentioned that with harmonisation, the EU looking to harmonise it all. Are we fighting Defra or are we fighting the EU on this?
What's happening in other countries? First of all, it's been going on for quite a few years in other European countries, and, for example, in Australia and New Zealand, and some other countries around the world. What you tend to find, the countries that are doing a lot of cost sharing, tend to be major exporters. If you look at the main ones where there's strong schemes, it is Denmark, Netherlands, and it's predominantly pig-based. And of course, it's in the interest of the industry to make sure they can export. The other, and there is no responsibility sharing, it's just cost sharing. But there is something fundamentally different. And it comes back to something Peter was talking about earlier, is because agriculture is so important in those countries, and particularly exports are part of the economics of the country in terms of their gross output, then there's a much better relationship between the countries and the centre, the government.
I hope during the course of this video you've been able to see the issues that are at stake in what is a really complicated consultation. We are concerned that we're going to end up with a bad outcome, so it is important that we make sure that we hear from farmers how it impacts on their businesses. We hope you've been able to have some of your questions answered during the course of the video as well. But if there are issues that you think or you still have concerns about, we are listening at the NFU. So please give us your feedback by email or through your group secretary or regional offices. We want to be able to give a first-rate response to what I believe is a major challenge to the livestock industry here in England.